Hi, I'm Dr. Jay Sutliffe, dietitian and health educator for Optimize for Life. This month's health tip, we're going to talk about macro confusion with a micro solution. For the last 30 years that I've been studying food and nutrition, the majority of the time you're going to hear people talk about macronutrients. And what we're going to talk about is macronutrients are carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. These are where we get our calories from. And most of the time when we talk about nutrition and weight gain, weight loss, eating healthy and so forth, we spend most of our time debating between the percentage breakdown of how much carbohydrate, how much protein, and how much fat we should be eating. Now the interesting thing is we can manipulate these, the percentages and so forth, and then we look at what's the outcome of that, what's the health of America the last 30 to 35 years that we've been wrestling over, should we go high carb, high fat, low fat, high protein, low protein. The outcome is that we're sicker than ever before. The healthcare costs are through the roof, and what we're looking at is a confusion around this macronutrient focus. Now let's just do a little recap here. Carbohydrates, remember, are foods that are basically from plant products. And the interesting thing is when you say something about a carbohydrate, it doesn't tell you if it's necessarily a good carbohydrate or it quotes a bad carbohydrate. What it just tells you is a carbohydrate. Carbohydrates are supposed to give us energy. It's important to get carbohydrates into our diet because it's where we get our energy from. Our body maintains a certain glucose level, blood glucose level from carbohydrates. Our brain, our central nervous system, our whole bodies run on carbohydrates. So the interesting thing is that when somebody says they're going to go on a low carbohydrate diet, basically what they're saying is they're going to go on foods that basically take out the energy in our diet. So what we want to look at is we want to look at the good carbs, the bad carbs. We get into those debates and things like that. We're gonna push that aside today. But before we do that, we want to get on to now protein. Protein is basically the golden child of nutrition. More people talk about the macronutrient protein than any other micronutrient or macronutrient out there. So the interesting thing is that we look at protein, we think it's the golden child. We don't talk about the types of protein. We don't say where the protein's coming from. We just say protein. And so protein is this miracle child. But again, it's a macronutrient. We've looked at studies that have high protein, low protein. What we want to do is get adequate amino acids, and those together make protein. Now, when you look at protein and carbohydrates, both of them, 1 gram is 4 calories per gram. Okay, so what we're looking at, that, and then you look at fat, it's 9 calories per gram. So fat is twice as dense per gram than carbohydrate or protein. Now protein is to help rebuild muscle tissue in the body, our skin, our nails, our hair, and so forth. But so we want to look at is protein. Okay? Now there's both plant protein and animal proteins. Okay, but we also want to look at now fat. Fat's the third macronutrient where we get our calories from. And people say they're on a low-fat diet, or now we're talking a lot about in the news and in different studies and things like talk about bringing fat back. Okay, so there's both animal and plant protein, and this is where most of the conversation takes place. Carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Okay, the result is that we're confused. Should we go high or low on any one of these? We want to manipulate the percentages. I spent my first 20 years or so in my profession of nutrition of prescribing different percentages of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, whether you're an athlete or not an athlete, you want to gain muscle, you want to lose some fat. But what I want to do now is tell you that it's really time to set aside all this nonsense that we're spending all this time debating about. We should be high carbohydrate, low carbohydrate, proteins, fats, things like that. So let's push that aside for a second, and let's focus on the micronutrients. The carbohydrates, proteins, and fats are the macronutrients. Now we want to look at the micronutrients. The micronutrients are the vitamins, the minerals, the phytochemicals, the antioxidants. Those fall into the classification of micronutrients. Okay, rarely do we spend time talking about those other than we say, okay, go to the supplement store or go to the health food store and buy a good multivitamin. Okay, make sure you're getting enough micronutrients in through your supplementation. But what I'm saying is that you need to focus your food choices on what micronutrient dense foods that you're going to consume. So again, micronutrients are the foods, the nutrients that are found in small amounts. They don't have calories, but they basically convert the other nutrients into energy, the carbohydrates, the proteins, and the fats. They convert those to energy. But what we need to do is choose our foods from a nutrient-dense standpoint. Rather than looking at carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, let's take a look at the micronutrients. The best way I feel you can really get a good handle on this is by looking at this chart that I have over here on the wall. It's called the ANDI score, the Aggregate Nutrient Density Index score, put together by Dr. Joel Furman, a colleague of mine. As we zoom in on this, I want to take a look at, these are the micronutrient density index scores for various common foods that you will find in grocery stores around America today. On the right-hand side here, we see a lot of these micronutrient scores are very low compared to the ones on the left. The higher the number, the more micronutrients you're going to have per bite. So the more nutrients per bite. So if this was, in a sense, a financial investment, you always want to get the most return for your money, then we look at the left-hand column. But let's look at the right-hand column. These are the foods that basically we all grew up on living in America. The lower numbered ones here have the least amount of nutrients per calorie per serving in the food. Okay, so when you look down here, we look at these very processed foods: colas, olive oil, French fries, vanilla ice cream, American cheese, potato chips, all have very low scores here. And somebody says, oh, I thought olive oil was a healthy food. We have to remember it's a very processed food. It's a very calorie-dense food. Okay, and as we start going up the list here, we start seeing white bread, we see wheat bread, whole milk, eggs, and so forth. The numbers go up because there's more micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, antioxidants per bite as you go up this list. Now, all of these foods would be considered a lower number, but we have some foods in here that actually have some good return on investment of the foods that you eat. Take grapes, for example, here. The score of 31 on the ANDI score. Okay? Walnuts, very good food, but again, they're a little bit higher in calories, and so their micronutrient density is a little bit lower for the amount of calories they have in them. Now, if you could shift over to the center column here, you start seeing the numbers go up dramatically. We start going up here in pumpkin seeds, oatmeal, chickpeas, flax seeds. Okay? The amount of nutrients you're getting for the amount of calories per serving is going up here. But really, the best column to go get most of your foods from is on this left-hand side. I'm not saying you can never eat these foods or should never eat these foods. Some of these foods we should never eat, but really some of these foods over here, like grapes, the walnuts and so forth, bananas, even some cashews, they're nutrient-dense foods, but not when you look at them in the sense of how many calories you're getting per serving. The best place to look is over here, and as you go up to the top here, you find the green leafy vegetables are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. And so what I try to do is help people transition their diets gradually from the right to the left. So what they can do is, if they're spending a lot of time over here, is start choosing foods over here and adding them to the foods here, and then you'll find out that you start eating more of these foods. It crowds out some of these less nutrient-dense foods. And then as you progress through that, maybe you pick a meal like breakfast for a week or two, or maybe you pick lunch or dinner. But basically what we start doing is then start choosing foods over here every meal, and you build your meals around these foods over here. For instance, you should have one large green leafy vegetable salad a day. And then there's more like an entree. And so you can see over here that if you choose anything over here in the kale, collards, bok choy, spinach, even all the way down here to romaine lettuce, which is 389, you have a very nutrient-dense diet, or even a nutrient-dense dish to start with. So every day, try to choose at least one large green leafy vegetable salad a day, and then start adding in some other things like carrots, asparagus, maybe some lentils or some other beans over here that we have in the middle here. We look at chickpeas. We start adding there, and that's a basis. Maybe at another meal you start using some of the berries. Over here we have some strawberries. We have blueberries that are ranking very high in the nutrient-dense scores. And so maybe you'd want to include a smoothie every day or something of that nature, and use in some of these vegetables here, and then maybe throw in some kale in your smoothie. And you start getting the nutrient density level up in your diet. But what we want to see is that we want to gradually be moving to the left and building our meals around these foods over here in the left-hand column, and then having those at every meal. And I say that every meal we should probably shoot for, try to get at least 1,000 points, so to speak, of the ANDI scores in every meal. And if you're not there, maybe you get 500. Start with a score of 500 and gradually build yourself up where you're trying to get at least 1,000 on Andy scores, at least at every meal. Okay, so there's a lot of confusion talking about carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. We found that in a 6-week study we just conducted this last year, that when people eat this way, they don't have to count calories, they don't have to worry about carbohydrates, they don't worry about proteins, they don't worry about fats, because they're eating micronutrient-dense foods in every single meal. And it crowds out these very calorically dense foods over here. So in 6 weeks, the average person in our study lost the average 11 pounds. They lost 2 inches off their waist, 2 inches off their hips. Their cholesterol went down by 10%. Okay, and their blood pressure came down about 9%. Their sleep improved. Just by simply shifting over and looking at this chart and choosing foods in the left-hand column more frequently at every meal, and filling in with the things in the middle here, and then basically eliminating or minimizing a lot of the foods in the right-hand column. Again, they weren't counting any calories, they weren't counting any carbohydrates, they weren't counting protein, they weren't counting fat, but they were eating a good variety of foods. They didn't feel deprived, their cravings went away. Okay, and then they also found that they had a better mood, they slept better, they had more energy, just by following this and not worrying about calories, proteins, fats, and those types of things. So we want to get rid of the macro confusion and find a micro solution. So let's start today by choosing these foods in the middle and the left-hand column at every meal. Build your meals around these two columns of foods. You can even go online and Google the ANDI, and you can search. There's a more exhaustive list of these scores. This is just a small abbreviated most common foods. You'll find that Whole Foods has adopted this chart for their customers. And so I'm going to encourage you to start at every meal, start building your meals around the middle and the left-hand column and hanging out more often in the left-hand and the center columns. And you'll find that you'll just naturally eat less food. You're going to be more satisfied. Okay, get more energy. You'll sleep better. Okay, and then your body will adjust, your blood pressure will adjust to where it needs to be, and you're not going to count calories, proteins, fats, carbohydrates, those types of things. Those days are over. Start focusing on micronutrients, and then pretty soon you don't even need this chart anymore. You're just finding that you eat more and more micronutrient-dense foods on a regular basis. And again, by doing this as well, you're going to find that you can eliminate eating the processed foods and things like that, and most likely your grocery bill is going to come down. So this is the micro solution for all this macro confusion that's going on, and I'm going to guarantee that if you follow this and you really adapt this into your lifestyle, you're going to have all these great benefits, and you're not going to be worrying about losing weight, gaining weight, all these different things. You're just going to focus on nutrient-dense foods, and you're going to reap the benefits of that. It's been proven time and time again. So there you have it, the Andy score. Go ahead and Google it online. Go ahead and take a shot of that and adapt that. Go meal by meal, and that by the next month you'll find that you're eating primarily only micronutrient dense foods. Hopefully this is helpful, and hopefully that you will benefit from this, and then a month from now you're going to see some dramatic changes, and then when you do this long term, you're going to change the scope of your health. This is Jay Sutliffe for Optimize for Life. Thank you.